You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru, the series where I talk about my many adventures, exploits, and outings in the workplace. Today I'll be talking about a classic and going back to the drive-thru itself. And today I'll be talking about my trusty iPod, something that I was inseparable from at the time. Essentially, this iPod was one that my brother had got used. He bought it from someone on a local equivalent to Craigslist. It's not Craigslist, but it's a similar thing, but it's more local. After he bought it, he loaded it up with a bunch of stuff, used it for a while until he got a newer one. And once my brother got a newer one, he gave me his old one. So then I had that. And it had a lot of great things on it. It had a Manga Storm, which is an app you can no longer get. It's one that he actually paid for, believe it or not. And so I had a lot of manga on that. That's where I first read Violence Jack. I actually read Violence Jack between classes when I was in my first semester of college. I read a little bit on it, and I read through all that was available at the time, which at the time was up to the El Dorado arc. So far, more has definitely been translated. In fact, even the ending has been translated. But there's still some chunks of the middle that have not, last I checked, which admittedly was a couple months ago. In addition to that, there were games on it. There was this game called Call of Mini Zombies, which I actually deleted from it. Because it would constantly give you notifications saying, "Your chainsaw thirsts for blood." It has an old version of YouTube on it where the icon was just an old TV rather than actually having the YouTube logo. And I used that as long as I could, although the version of the app that's that outdated no longer works. In fact, it stopped working long before my iPod broke, which we'll get into in a little bit. But it was with that YouTube app that I would listen to music while I was at work in the back window of the drive-thru. So, technically, they had a no headphones, no speakers, no music policy, no electronic devices whatsoever, as most fast food places tend to. But they didn't really enforce it, as most fast food places don't tend to. So, I would always have my iPod back there. Now, I didn't have headphones, and I didn't have a speaker. So, what I would do is an old trick that everyone did there if they didn't have either of those. You grab an empty cup, and you put the iPod in there, and it sort of creates this sort of acoustic cone that, pushes the sound out towards you. I think that's how that works, but anyway, it makes it louder. So I would do that, and I would listen to all sorts of things. The music on the iPod, as well as going on YouTube and listening to, the Dragon Ball Z soundtrack and things like that. I'd always have my iPod on me, and I would also use it in my car ride to and from work. It has a ton of music on it, and that's why I always loved having it. And I didn't have a smartphone, because as I've mentioned multiple times, I didn't have a smartphone until 2017. Part of the reason for that is because I had my trusty old iPod. It was a Generation 2 iPod Touch. So very old, at least by now. And it was even outdated by the time I was using it, but I didn't care because I use a lot of outdated shit. So I just had that, and then I had my flip phone. You could actually text from my iPod. I actually put a text app on it that I let my friend use because he didn't have a cell phone. So I let him use it whenever I wasn't using the iPod. I'd let him use the text app on that. And it was that same friend that I got a job there that I talked about in a previous episode. And he'd come in, 8 hours early along with me because he didn't have any other way to get to work, and he was actually staying with me for a while. So I'd drive him to work. I'd hand him the iPod, and he'd go out and play with it for, several hours. Granted, this was later on, so, obviously I didn't use it as much because he was using it. But when his shift would start, I'd take it back. And it wasn't always 9 hours. Sometimes it was only 4 hours or a couple hours that he'd have to wait. But the point is, as soon as he'd start the shift, he'd hand it back to me. And then he'd just sit there drinking refill after refill of coffee while he used my iPod playing the games on it, Air Hockey and Brisk Saber. I don't know if anyone remembers Brisk Saber, but it was a Star Wars game made by Brisk T where you just slash, Brisk. It's kind of similar to Fruit Ninja. You also slash droids and stuff. I think the Brisk was a bonus power-up. It's been a while since I played it. But eventually that iPod did break. It still works, but the screen doesn't. I've shown it in that video I did a while back called Gotta Love Technology. The screen is very fucked up on it, but it's essentially made it into an iPod Shuffle, so I still got all the music on it. Unfortunately, it does not have a working screen, so I can't actually use any of the games or apps on it, which is a damn shame. It's definitely something I will never get rid of, even if it ceases to work entirely, because it's a huge nostalgic part of that work shift for me. I'm just listening to the music on it, watching Beavis and Butthead videos on it when I was working, because another thing I would do is when there were no customers, I'd take it out and I'd watch YouTube, and I'd watch Beavis and Butthead on YouTube and stuff like that with it, which is how I watched a lot of the episodes that never got released on DVD. And again, I have seen the entire series at this point. But that's how I watched a lot of them, because at the time I only had the Mike Judge collection. I think I did get the history of Beavis and Butthead while I was still working there, but I can't say for sure. It might have been after that, after I got my next job. I still keep that iPod with me, because it's a part of my past, and it's something that I hold dear. It's one of my most prized possessions. Just a shitty old iPod that has its original owner's name engraved on the back of it. Yeah, it just has some guy who I've never met, who my brother bought it from. It just has his name engraved on the back. And it had like a pink case that I would cover it with. But eventually I stopped using it because the button, the power button's kind of broken and it would stick if it has the case on. So it had all sorts of problems. It has a dent in it where the volume buttons kind of poke out and protrude. But the fact that it works at all is a miracle. That thing has taken so much abuse over the years. But yeah, that's this episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru. My good old iPod. I love the thing. If I could ever fix it and make it work properly, I would. Hell, maybe I'd even do a video showcasing some of the old shit I have on it. I think that'd be an interesting thing to do. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like I'll ever be able to get it working, because I don't know anywhere that'll actually fix it. And if they are going to fix it, I don't want them to erase the memory either. But yeah. That's the story of my iPod. Hopefully it was entertaining, and I'll see you next time. Doodles.
I'm gonna fucking die here, Jack!